Imagine, if you will, it's a cold day. Snow is falling. What would your likelihood be of driving home and on your way home stopping and getting hot chocolate? Hot chocolate is $2 no matter where you get it. And so are you going to stop and spend $2 for a cup of hot chocolate on a cold day? Or it's a blazing hot day. Hot chocolate is still $2. Are you going to stop and get hot chocolate on a hot day? One thing we've learned so far is the law of demand tells us that as the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. We're more likely to buy something if it is cheaper, all things being equal. But the thing is, all things aren't always equal, right? Price isn't the only thing that determines our demand for a good. And so what we're going to learn today is how a change in demand happens, which is a change in any factor besides the price. For example, you're more likely to demand a hot chocolate, buy a hot chocolate on a really cold day than you are on a really warm day. On a warm day, you may be more likely to buy a $2 bottle of water if you're working outside or you've got to be outside than you are on a nice fall day or even a cold day in the winter where that bottle of water really will not have that much usefulness to you, even though it's the same price. And so today, the idea is to look at what causes changes in demand. And a change in demand basically means that more or fewer people are willing to purchase a product without a change in price. So what this means is we're going to have to draw a new demand curve, and we'll look at that visually on the next slide. So if demand increases, that means you have more people willing to purchase the product at the same price. Think of Frosty Boy on March 1st every year when the lines are out the door because you have lots and lots and lots of people who have had 6 months of waiting for ice cream. So even though it's a bitterly cold day every year, you still have a lot. Or, what the demand is on a beautiful spring night when Little League Baseball's going on and there's always just kids out the door there. Well, even though their prices haven't changed, the demand on those days goes up. Whereas if it's kind of a cold or rainy day during the summer, there's really not much demand for ice cream. So even though their prices don't change, the demand is less. And so when Frosty Boy's demand is high on a warm day or a day with Little League Baseball, you push that demand curve to the right. More people are willing to buy Frosty Boy at the same price as before. Whereas if it is a cold day or it's a rainy day where people don't want to be outside, you're not thinking about ice cream, the demand is less. The demand curve shifts to the left. Fewer people want to buy Frosty Boy than before. So this is what it looks like visually. When demand increases, we have a new demand curve that is drawn to the right. When demand decreases, there's a new demand curve drawn to the left. And again, this happens because you have more people willing to buy something at the same price. Your demand goes up. There are fewer people willing to buy something at the same price when your demand goes down. Now, this is a little bit of a different concept from what we learned earlier, which is the change in quantity demanded. When there is a change in price, there is no change in demand, but there is a change in quantity demanded. That's what we learned earlier this week. When some factor besides price changes, the price stays the same, but more or fewer people are buying something, then we have a change in demand, and therefore we have a new curve. So change in price, change in quantity demanded, same curve. Change in anything other than price is a change in demand, and that causes a new curve to be drawn. And that's a really, really, really important consideration. Why? Why does demand change? Why do we have to draw a new curve? There are generally 6 reasons, and these can be boiled down even further. But number 1, consumer incomes change. As we have more money, we're more likely to demand things. So if you get, say, an extra $5,000 a year. Now you have $5,000 more dollars to spend than you did before. You're more likely to buy things. Think about, are people in, say, Carmel more likely, you expecting to see higher demand for goods in Carmel than you might be in a less affluent community? Of course you are, because there's more income there. People have more money to spend, therefore they're going to demand more. Whereas a less affluent community, there's less money to spend, so they're going to demand less, even though the prices may be the same in both communities. The second is the number of consumers. As the community grows, demand increases. We're seeing this in New Pal. As our community of New Palestine is growing, as more people are moving here, what is going to happen to the amount of people at Frosty Boy, the amount of people at McDonald's, the amount of people at the hardware store, whatever, the gas station, whatever institutions we have, the amount of people in our school? It's all going to go up. The demand for things goes up when there's more people, there's more consumers. And you think, is the demand going to be higher for goods here in New Palestine, or is it going to be higher in a smaller community like Morristown? Well, it's going to be higher in New Pal because there's more people here. There's going to be higher demand in Fishers because there's more people there. So as you have more people, demand increases. And so one thing you'll see as more people move into our community is you'll probably see, yes, greater crowds at the restaurants and the gas stations and the stores, but that also will probably bring about more restaurants and more stores and more places to shop and eat and entertain ourselves because of the fact that there's greater demand here. Consumer tastes. Think of fads. Several years ago, when I first was starting teaching, the hair feather fad was a thing. All of a sudden we had a bunch of students that it was stylish to weave a feather into your hair. And so the demand for hair feathers went way up for a couple of months, and then that thing fell out of style and the demand for hair feathers went right back down. My kids were obsessed with fidget spinners a few years ago. I think most kids were. You might have been part of that group that was obsessed with the fidget spinner a few years ago. And for about 6 months, demand for fidget spinners was off the charts, and you could buy them in all kinds of colors and styles, and you could buy expensive ones, you could buy cheap ones, whatever. There was huge demand for these things. And of course, that meant that suppliers supplied them, businesses supplied them. Huge demand for fidget spinners. Today, there's no demand for fidget spinners. They fell out of style. They fell out of fashion. Our consumer tastes changed. And as our tastes change, our demand changes. Think about DVDs. The demand for those have gone down because of the fact that we don't buy them anymore. And we'll look at a reason for that here later on. Expectations may be another one. If you're expecting things to change in the future, you might act now. And so that can distort demand a little bit. Substitutes and complements are a big reason for changes in demand. Earlier, a couple of videos ago, one of the examples we gave you was that pork is $2 and beef is $2.50. If the price of beef goes down to $1.50, more people are going to buy beef. So we're going to say there's an increase in quantity demanded for beef because the price of beef went down. So more people will demand the quantity of beef, but at the same time, there will be less demand for pork because the price does not change. But because beef is now cheaper than pork, more people will buy beef. Therefore, there is less demand for pork, even though the price didn't change. So beef being a substitute, because the increase in quantity demanded for beef means that there is less demand for pork because the substitute became cheaper. If beef went back up to $2.50, the quantity demanded for beef would go down, and the demand for pork would go up. And finally, complements. The use of one good leads to another. Think about Netflix. If you get a Netflix subscription, you've got to have a place to watch said Netflix subscription. So now you're more likely to say buy a Roku or an Apple TV or a Chromecast or a Fire Stick. So the sales of Netflix also lead to an increase in the sales of those things, what we call set-top boxes or smart TVs. And on the flip side, more set-top boxes and smart TVs likely probably lead to more subscriptions for Netflix or Hulu or YouTube TV or those type of services because they complement each other. The use of one leads to another. When the Colts are allowed to have fans at their games, the usage of downtown restaurants goes up on game day. Those are complements. People are going to the game, they want to eat, so they eat before the game at the restaurant that's within walking distance of the stadium. Those complement each other. The demand for one leads to an increased demand for another. So those are the factors that lead to demand. And again, go back to this little distinction between demand and quantity demanded. A change in price will lead to a change in quantity demanded. There's no new curve. So if the price of beef goes from $2 to $1.50, quantity demanded will go down, or excuse me, quantity demanded will go up. We will move down the demand curve. So the demand does not change. We don't draw a new curve. We move down the existing demand curve. If there are more or fewer people willing to purchase a product at the same price as before, that requires a new curve. That's a change in demand. This is a really, 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 really confusing concept because while they're kind of diametrically opposite, they sound the same. They use almost the same terminology. So understand, if it's a change in price, it's a change in quantity. Move up and down the curve. If it's a change in anything besides price, number of consumers, consumer tastes, expectations, change in the price of a substitute or a complement, consumer incomes, whatever it is, it's a change in demand, and we draw a new curve. And again, if demand increases, that new curve goes to the right, and if demand decreases, that new curve goes to the left. And by the way, always use left and right and not up and down, because when we get to supply later on, we're going to flip that around, and up and down mean different things than left and right. So always use, if something increases in economics on the curve, it goes to the right. If something decreases on the curve or the chart, it goes to the left, because we have more people or fewer people buying it at the same price. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a greater understanding of demand.